The Book of Esther is usually read as a story about survival in exile, but it was written to a people who were asking deeper questions. Has God forgotten his promise of a king? There's no throne in Jerusalem. There's no prophet in the Book of Esther. And God, he never speaks. But if you know how to read the hyperlinks of the Hebrew Bible, you will find that the Book of Esther is a masterpiece in hidden prophecy. It quietly insists that the hope of a coming king is still alive, but it does so not through overt predictions, but through a series of ancient patterns made new. Now, to see these patterns, we have to look at the architecture of the story. And I put together this Messianic prophecy chart to help us track these connections as we go. You can find a link to download this chart in the description below. It's a great tool to have open as we walk through the narrative. And you can go ahead also and hit subscribe if you want more deep dives into the design of the Bible. And now, let's step back and examine the history that set the stage for this drama. Esther married the king of Persia, but for that sentence to even make sense, we have to take a step back. You see, Esther was an Israelite exile who was born and raised outside of Israel. You see, in the year 586, after 2 decades of rebellion against Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar is finally going to destroy the city of Jerusalem and take its people into exile there in Babylon. But Daniel, he's already been in Babylon since 605, and Ezekiel, he's been there too. Now, both of these guys, they were long gone by the time that Esther came on the scene. Esther, she becomes queen 41 years after Daniel's last year as a city administrator, there in 521, and 90 years after Ezekiel's final oracle in the year 571. Now, if you want to watch a video which explains this timeline of Ezekiel, you can take a look at the link in the description below. Well, Daniel predicted Persia's conquest of Babylon, and Ezra recorded Judah's return from exile according to Persian decree in the year 539. However, not all Jews decided to come back to Judah. Some stayed behind. As a matter of fact, most scholars agree that the vast majority of the Jews decided to stay in Persia. Only about 50,000 returned to Judah. Estimates range from between 80 and 95% of the Jews chose to remain in Persian exile, including the family of Esther and Mordecai. Now, one of the long recognized abnormalities about the Book of Esther is the conspicuous absence of the word God in the text. For example, the Hebrew word Yahweh will occur about 400 times in the book of Exodus, but it shows up 0 times in Esther. And Elohim, the word Elohim is present 220 times in Genesis, but 0 times in Esther. Now, this is kind of curious. Adonai, look how many times it's present in Ezekiel, 220 times, but in Esther, it doesn't show up once. Now, this fact bothered early Christian interpreters so much that many of them argued that Esther should be removed from the canon. And later, Calvin, he refused to write a commentary on the Book of Esther. But this perspective fails to acknowledge the possibility that God's name is intentionally absent in order to make God's providence more obviously present. And God's providential hand is active in the book of Esther through the abundance of coincidences. For example, in chapter 1, Esther just so happens to win an empire-wide beauty contest and become queen of Persia. And then in the next chapter, Mordecai just so happens to overhear and then thwart an assassination plot against the king. And then in a crucial juncture in the narrative, the king just so happens not to be able to sleep. And so he just so happens to ask his servants to read from the royal records, and they just so happen to read the record of how Mordecai saved the king. And then Haman just so happens to enter right at the moment when the king is trying to decide how he ought to reward Mordecai, resulting in Haman's humiliation and Mordecai's exaltation. These events take place at the very center of the book of Esther, which is itself one giant chiasm. A chiasm which begins and ends with 2 feasts and contains 2 decrees. Haman's evil decree to destroy the Jews and Mordecai's counter decree to save them. And then we have two banquets of Esther surrounding the fall of Haman and the rise of Mordecai. Now, this reversal contains one of those hidden hyperlinks in the Book of Esther, a narrative pattern which functions as Messianic prophecy. And the key is in how these two characters are labeled. So take a look at Mordecai. How is Mordecai labeled? Well, he is a son of Kish, and he's from the tribe of Benjamin. Now, can you think of another Benjamite whose father's name is Kish? Well, of course you can. This is Saul. Take a look at this. There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, and he had a son whose name was Saul. Now, both Saul and Mordecai confronted an enemy, and for Mordecai, this enemy was Haman, the wicked Haman, who sought to destroy the Jews. And 5 times the text is going to call Haman an Agagite. Now, are there any other Agagites in the Bible? Well, there's only one, and it is Agag himself. In 1 Samuel 15, Agag is the king of the Amalekites, whom God called Saul to destroy, to devote them to destruction because the Amalekites opposed Israel as they came out of Egypt, wandering through the wilderness. Now, this story took place in Exodus 17, where God said, "I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven." And he again affirmed to Israel, when God has given you rest, I want you to blot out the memory of Amalek. And now he's calling Saul to do so. Did he? Well, Saul, he does defeat the Amalekites. However, it says that he took Agag alive, and Saul and the people spared Agag's life. Samuel is going to scold Saul for doing so. What about Mordecai? Did Mordecai conquer his Agagite? Well, you bet he did. Haman is going to be hung on his own gallows. But there's another layer to this comparison. Not only did Saul spare Agag's life, but he also permitted the people to pounce on the spoil. 1 Samuel 15, spoil which should have been devoted to destruction. But what about Mordecai? The text makes abundantly clear that even though the Israelites were permitted to plunder the goods of those who attacked them, 3 times it says that the Israelites laid no hands on the plunder. They laid no hands on the plunder. They did not lay their hands on the plunder. This is an explicit contrast to Saul and his men. Well, what's the point? Take a look at this summary. The Book of Esther is going to replay that ancient conflict between Israel and the Amalekites and between Saul and Agag. But this time, the later son of Kish, that is Mordecai, he will succeed where the former son of Kish, Saul, failed. And look at the specific Hebrew terms that the Book of Esther is going to use to make that point. Take a look at this. Just as the kingdom, the Malakot, was taken from Saul and given to a neighbor who is better than him. Let's look at how these Hebrew words are applied in the book of 1 Samuel. Samuel said to Saul, "For you have rejected the word of God, and God has rejected you from being king. He has torn the Malakot from you and given it to a neighbor who is better than you, given the kingdom to David." So in the same way, Mordecai, or that is Haman's position, was given to Mordecai. Look at this. On that day, Artaxerxes, or Ahasuerus, gave Queen Esther the house of Haman and the signet ring to Mordecai. We took what was Haman's and we gave it to Mordecai. But this next example is even more explicit in its connection to 1 Samuel. The kingdom, the Malakot, was taken from Queen Vashti in chapter 1 and given to a neighbor who was better than her, Esther. Look at this, chapter 1. Vashti, she will never come before the king again. Let her position, her Malakot, the same word, let her kingdom be given to another who is better than she. And so the whole book of Esther is about taking the kingdom away from Saul and giving it to David, taking the kingdom away from an antichrist and restoring it to the legitimate Christ. This is how the book of Esther reignites Israel's hope in the restoration of their kingdom. You see, their return from exile was pitiful, and there certainly was no son of David on the throne. But Esther is going to use these subtle narrative hyperlinks to point back to the moment when David replaced Saul as Israel's king as a promise that a future David would do the same. The Book of Esther uses Mordecai as a messianic model in two more ways. First, through a seemingly inconsequential sentence spoken by Haman's wife the night before Haman died. She says in chapter 6, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but you will surely fall before him." Now, I doubt that Haman's wife was aware of it, but her words activated three critical Hebrew hyperlinks. One to the first messianic prophecy in the whole Bible, Genesis 3:15. You see, the seed of Mordecai, the Zerah, the Zerah of Mordecai is related to the seed of the woman who will crush the head of the snake, because Mordecai is of the seed of the Jewish people, or more literally, of the seed of Judah. That's what the Hebrew word is talking about. It literally can be translated of the seed of Judah. And of course, Genesis 49 teaches us that Judah, from this tribe will come the one to whom the scepter and the ruler's staff belong. The next great messianic prophecy in the Torah is Balaam's oracle in Numbers 24, where we read that the seed, the Zerah, of this king, well, he will be a lion king, connecting us to Genesis 49, and he will be higher than Agag. This king, this Zerah, he will be exalted over Agag, just like Mordecai was exalted over Haman the Agagite. But this future Mordecai-like Messiah will not just be a man of war. He will speak peace to the nations, just like Mordecai spoke peace to his people. The very last verse of the whole book, chapter 10, verse 3, Mordecai is second in rank to the king. He sought the welfare of his people, and he spoke peace to all of his people. Now, the only other time in the whole Bible where this phrase to speak peace is used is Zechariah 9, where we read of a king, a coming king who will be humble, who will be mounted on a donkey, and he will speak peace to the nations. He will dabar shalom. Now, the purpose of the entire Old Testament is to use stories from the past in order to generate hope for the future. And the Book of Esther is no different, and it does so by taking its hero and its heroine and placing them in the Messianic David slot, thereby giving the exilic readers of this book fresh hope, saying to them, "Your king is coming. This king, he will speak peace to his people, and he will speak peace to the nations." Another biblical heroine whose book has significant messianic allusions is Ruth. If you want to see this book's strange parallel to the sport of football, you should check out this next video.